Hi, in this video, I'm going to talk about labels. Labels are actually one of my favorite functions in Inspira because once you get used to them and once you know how to use them well, it can be a really powerful tool to help you organize and find your content. A good starting point with labels is to understand how they work and also how they are different from what we've already been doing. So many of us are used to using folders. So think of your desktop folder and try to think of that more as something like a box. So we can add a label to our box, but that box label has to be quite general because it has to include all of the information that's stored inside that box. And the only way that we can get our information out of that box is to open it and sort through our files. So now we've opened our box, let's see what's inside. So in this one box, I've just got 3 exams, but you can see that from these 3 exams, I've got quite a lot of different information here. If we break it down, I've got 3 different courses, I've got different semesters, I've got week information, I've got different types of assessment here, and I've also got year information. And you see here that some of this is not consistent. So I'm going to hazard a guess and say that your folders might look something like this as well. So labels allows us to then break down all of that information into smaller, manageable bytes. And these smaller, manageable bytes are called metadata. So if you look at my titles from before and then compare it to this data here, you can see that we've still got course codes, we've still got the assessment type, we can still have our semester and year information, and we can even add extra information that maybe we didn't before because it would have made our titles too long and too cumbersome. So this is how I would recommend setting out your labels for Inspira, but it's not the only way. The most important thing is that labels are something that are going to help you to find your content later on. So now that we have a better idea about how labels work, let's go and look at how some of them in Inspira. So here I am in my question bank. So we have a lot of We have a lot of questions here, and if you've been using Inspira for a while, you'll see that. And one thing you may have noticed as well is that you don't just have access to your questions, but you have access to a lot of other people's questions as well. So this means that finding your content within Inspira is so important, and that's where the labels are really, really helpful. So let's think of an example where we might need to use these labels. We know how to add them, but let's put this into context. Why do I need labels? So last year, I created a question. Let's say I want to recreate that question and use a variation of it for an exam this semester. But I don't remember which assessment item that was, and I'm not really sure which course it was because last year I used Inspira for 2 different courses. But I do know that it was in semester 2, 2020. So then I can go to my filters, to labels, and I can type in my semester 2, 2020 label and select that. Now, all my questions have been sorted to only show my semester 2, 2020. So then we can also see that most of these have been created by Adriana Diaz. But I know that for a fact, I created this question that I'm trying to find. So we can go back to our filters up here and to created by, and then I can enter my name. And then this narrows down our results even more. This is everything that I created in semester 2, 2020. So this is a way that we can narrow down our search and start looking for things in Inspira if you can't remember all of the information. Similarly, if we want to look at something that we did for a specific course at a specific time, we can leave semester 2 selected and add another label here. So I remember the semester, I don't know who made it, but I also remember the course as well. So now I can pick the course code and the semester and the year. So let's look at some of the labels that I've added to be able to do this. So like on the slide I showed before, I have my course code, I have my semester and my year, and then I also have listening comprehension. So that's my question type. This I find is very helpful for languages depending on how you're setting up your tests. Some languages like to set up their tests to have a listening comprehension component, text comprehension, speaking, perhaps if you're using the audio questions here, as well as grammar-focused questions. So depending on how you set up your exams, you may want to add these labels, especially if you're using pools as well, because that's going to help you filter those questions to add them to the right part of your test. So what you would want to avoid here, you can see I've got separate labels. What you would want to avoid is making your labels too long. So if I were to say it's SPAN 1020, but semester 2, and also 2020. Okay, this is now one label, and that's a lot of information for one label. This means that you're going to end up creating more labels for all of your questions, because, for example, we can't reuse this label for next year for SPAN 1020. Likewise, anything that's for 1 year, we'll have to create this combination with a different course code. So it's better to keep them shorter like this so that they can be added to different questions. Another hint for creating your labels is not to include contextual information, such as something very specific to this question type. For example, this question type is about mole and mestizaje in Mexico. So how many questions am I really going to have about mole and mestizaje? Probably not too many in the whole of the Spanish major. So that kind of really contextual specific information can go in your title. Remember that your titles are actually also searchable. So it's good to make use of these titles to help you find your questions later on. For example, I want to find my mole question that I made last year, but I don't remember much about it, but I know it was about mole. So I can put in a keyword in my search bar, and that brings up my mole questions. So what do we do now if you've already gone ahead, made a lot of questions in Inspira, but you haven't had time to think of your labels properly? Well, you can add them retrospectively, which is great, but the challenging part is you finding those questions and remembering what those questions are for to add the correct labels. What I find to be the easiest is to go back to your question sets. So go back to a question set, and then you've got some information, hopefully here, that you've got your course code, you've got some information about what the unit was, what the assessment type was, and then you can break down that title and then create your labels from there. Another hint for helping to sort out your questions without labels is to go back to your question set, and you can select created by me to filter out everything that's created by other people, or you could also search for other people in your team. For example, I know that Adriana made a lot of questions and I want to check that they're all labeled. I can bring up hers as well. So I'm going to go to created by me, and then you can see in this column here, it says labels. So we can actually sort this column if we click on it. And now all of our labeled questions are showing up, and our unlabeled questions will show up at the end. So once I've gone to the end of my bar, or my 31 pages, you can see now I've only got my unlabeled questions. If I go to the page before as well, you can see I have a lot of unlabeled questions. And some of these are questions that I've probably created and then not used. For example, this new question that hasn't got a title. So that's a big indication for me that I need to go back and look at this question and see if it's necessary. That way I can delete it, or I can label it as appropriate, and that's going to help organize all of these questions that we have. So to summarize, the tips for labeling. Think of your titles and then try to break them down into smaller chunks. Don't include really specific contextual information for your questions. That can go in the title, and that's also searchable. Lastly, try and think of the sorts of things that you go back to look for later on when you're creating assessment. Some of you will already have this idea in mind. You're just not sure about how to apply it to Inspira. So, course codes, semesters, and the assessment type are a really good starting point. When we're looking at the metadata for questions, it's also really helpful to include the type of question. So whether it's grammar, vocabulary, listening, and comprehension, those are all things that you can add to your questions. Thank you for listening, and I hope you found this helpful.